This is John Reps, Professor Emeritus at Cornell University. Early in my studies of the history of American urban planning, I was introduced to the views of cities drawn and published by T.M. Fowler. Eventually, that led to my research for this book, A History and Analysis of Urban Viewmaking in America, in which Fowler played such an important role. In the second half of the 19th century, a new kind of printed urban image made its American appearance. Unlike conventional townscapes showing cities as seen at ground level, views like this of Harrisburg in 1855 looked down on the city from a point high in the air. And unlike earlier engravings that were difficult to produce, required hand coloring, and commanded high prices, the new bird's eye views were done in the less expensive medium of lithography and could be printed in color economically. American urban viewmaking accelerated after the Civil War, led by Albert Ruger, a Union War veteran who began to publish city views in 1866. Among those working for him as a sales agent was Thaddeus Fowler, who in 1869, as this newspaper tells us, was helping sell Ruger's views of Jefferson City, Missouri. His formal task was to find a sufficient number of subscribers to a printed view of the place that would be delivered some months later. Here is the central part of that print, one of 40 similar images Ruger published in 1869. You can see the rectangular street grid, the waterfront along the Missouri River, the state capitol on its elevated site, and all the houses, railroads, factories, and shops of the town as they would have appeared if viewed from a point high in the air. Parts of that view were probably drawn by Fowler, who by that time had ample opportunity to observe how Ruger produced images like this. In 1870, Fowler began his own view-making career, one he would pursue for more than half a century. On this chart, showing the working years of leading American viewmakers, I have outlined in red Fowler's long record. In his lifetime of 52 years, he produced at least the 426 views that I've been able to record. Almost certainly, there were several others that have eluded my search. Fowler began work in Wisconsin, where another Ruger trainee and former sales agent, H. Bailey, had started his own view-making career. Working separately and together, the two were soon joined by Bailey's brother, Oakley. Now, Fowler's photograph in the center was taken many years later, but in 1870, he would have been as young and vigorous as his two friends and professional companions. After a few years in Wisconsin and nearby states, the three set off eastward, producing views in Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Ohio, and New York, before each decided to strike out on his own. 248 of Fowler's recorded views are of towns and cities in Pennsylvania. They are a wonderful resource for anyone interested in city form, urban transportation, industrial location, housing, architectural style, and many other subjects. My maps show the locations of some of the Pennsylvania towns he drew in just 9 of the 31 years he produced at least one view in the state. These maps suggest how he economized on time and travel by choosing each year to work in a narrowly defined region. A great deal of nonsense has been written about how these views were produced. They were certainly not drawn by an artist in the basket of a hot air balloon, nor were they made from photographs taken by a camera suspended from a balloon or kite, or one strapped to the belly of a pigeon. Instead, the bird's eye artist first selected the most attractive or important part of the town for the view's foreground. When Fowler worked in Beaver, Pennsylvania in 1900, he chose the riverfront along the Ohio. Using an existing street map, or one he drew himself, he constructed a perspective grid with straight lines converging on selected vanishing points. At Beaver, Fowler might have started with something like this little grid at the bottom. On that drawing, or perhaps on a tracing over it, he would then add street lines, each leading to a selected vanishing point. On Fowler's view of Beaver, a town laid out with straight streets intersecting at right angles, I've drawn in red the extended center lines of typical streets. In the real world, parallel sight lines converge on the horizon, as anyone can test by looking down a long, straight railroad track. As my red lines show, Fowler made them converge well above the horizon and far beyond the picture frame. Drawing in this manner increases the size of each block and every building beyond what they would be if vanishing points were on the horizon. Look at these two details from the Beaver view. At the top is a portion from the background, and at the bottom is a foreground section of identical size on the ground. By choosing distant convergent points, Fowler thus could show blocks and buildings in the background at nearly the same size on the drawing as foreground objects. This kind of tinkering with the rules of perspective required Fowler to be very accurate in his drawing because so many tiny details would become visible. At upper left is a much reduced copy of his drawing of Sinking Spring, Pennsylvania in 1898, a view that apparently was never published. Below is the central portion of that drawing that I have enlarged to show how carefully Fowler recorded all the essential architectural features of each building, whether the mansions at the top or the smaller and closely spaced, more modest houses at the bottom. Not incidentally, this obsession with detail also increased the number of potential customers. With every building on the view shown with recognizable features, owners or occupants would have a greater incentive to buy copies. The rules of commerce thus triumphed over the rules of perspective drawing. On the other hand, this put an additional burden on the artist. Architectural details in the view had better be correct or sales would suffer. This is one reason for believing in the accuracy of such views. Another reason is the way Fowler and fellow viewmakers went about their work. They walked every street and lane of the town with a sketch pad or notebook in hand, drawing every building and landscape feature they saw. Fowler's sketches have not survived, but we can look at the sketchbook Edwin Whitefield used in 1877 for his view of Quincy, Massachusetts. His quick sketches include marginal notes to remind him of topographic or other conditions he should recall when images from the sketchbook were redrawn at proper size on the perspective base. Fowler drew and published his views, but he was no lithographer. He sent drawings like that of Belle Vernon, Pennsylvania, to be printed by lithographic firms in Boston or Milwaukee or elsewhere. There, specialized craftspeople would do what was necessary to produce the printed version of this industrial town on the Monongahela River. At the printers, a lithographic person had to reproduce every line of Fowler's drawing in mirror image. He had to draw that on the surface of a specially treated fine-grained limestone slab, using a greasy crayon or a pen with greasy ink. The stone was then treated to fix the image, moistened thoroughly with water, and then rolled with greasy printer's ink. The ink adhered only to the drawn lines on the stone and was repelled by the wet surface elsewhere. A sheet of paper was placed on the stone, covered with a protective blanket, and passed through the press under heavy pressure. This transferred to the paper's surface all the lines and other features of the drawing. What I and others have been remiss in pointing out is how critically important was the role of the lithographer, who may have created so many of the details we admire in the printed views. Look at these two enlargements of the lower right corner of the Bell Vernon view. At the top left is an enlargement of Fowler's rather imprecise drawing. At the bottom right is the crisp and convincing image on the lithograph, with features only hinted at in the drawing. Bird's eye artists may have relied on lithographers in other ways. Here is one piece of evidence suggesting urban view artists may also have sent written directions or suggestions to their lithographers. In 1878, Fowler's former boss, Albert Ruger, drew this bird's eye view of Wiscasset, Maine. My red circle identifies one of the subjects of a long note Ruger wrote on the back of the drawing. This is a much shortened version of those instructions. In them, Ruger twice tells his lithographer to emphasize the wood and rocks in making the countryside, as he said, look as rough and rocky as possible. He also pointed out an error in his drawing, showing the drawbridge as one that pivots rather than sliding in and out. In the printed version you see here, the rough topography is indeed emphasized, and the bridge is shown correctly. Hundreds of these old images of our city are now available in digital form at the Library of Congress website and other sources. Readily available also are modern air views that with some manipulation can be oriented like that chosen by Fowler or some other bird's eye view artist. This is one example. Bell Vernon a century ago, and the city as it appears today from a similar viewpoint. These old views of our cities have always been fascinating. Now, with modern images to compare, they come alive again and serve as a valuable reminder of the constant process of urban growth and change.